Hello, everyone. We are starting our really interesting discussion on learning communities in rural areas. My name is Gina Ebner. I'm Secretary General of the EAEA. I'll moderate the meeting today, and a very warm welcome to everyone. First, a few household items and a bit about the discussion today. We will now have the live stream, and you can already see our experts and speakers. I'll introduce them in a moment. So we will take about half an hour, 40 minutes to start the discussion, and we invite you to then join our online discussion, our written online discussion on the EPALE website. Where you can continue until about 4 o'clock this afternoon. So feel free to come in and maybe then have lunch and then come back. So it's very, very flexible. And you can then comment and discuss with other people. So let me come to the topic, learning communities in rural areas. A big thank you to our colleagues at the national level who have, launched the topic for us and are behind it. There are teams from the pilot teams in Austria, Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, Hungary, and Poland. Who are regularly posting on the topic and doing really great work on the network. So please have a look at that if this is a topic that you find interesting. Now, one apology already, we have been having technical difficulties. Those of you who have tried to access the website might have seen that there was a bit of a problem last night. And we are also having a bit of problems with connecting all the speakers. Eva, who is actually in a rural area, is having problems with the internet connection. This is something we might consider during the discussion. So hopefully all will go well. But if there's something, please, I'm already apologizing in advance, but hopefully that means that everything will be perfect. Now, let me give you a quick introduction to our speakers. I do have their CVs in front of me, and they are all very accomplished teachers, lecturers, activists, and so on. I will shorten a bit the introduction, and hopefully you will follow up what they are doing. There will be some links and information. So first I have here Cath Gristy, who is a lecturer in the Institute of Education at the University of Plymouth in the UK. And Cath does a lot of research in education, schools teaching, including the topics clearly of social justice, inclusion, and exclusion. And one of her interests is rural place and space. And she will tell us a bit more about that a bit later. Then I have Zoltan Hajdu, who is not an adult educator from his background, but he's actually an environmental scientist. And his special interest is community water management and the interdependence between water, landscape, and local communities. A very interesting topic, and he will later tell us about the connection and the project that he is working on. And then we have Eva Smuk-Stratenwerth from Poland, and she is running a lot of initiatives. She has initiated the Ecological-Cultural Association, Ziarno. It's probably wrongly pronounced, but there we go. It's SEED in English, and also an ecological folk high school. She has done a lot more projects, but yes, she will have the opportunity to talk in a bit about that. Now, let me start by asking all our speakers what or how do you understand learning communities in rural areas? What is your concept? To get us started off, what do we mean? Who wants to get started? Maybe Zoltan, you can go ahead. What do you mean when we talk
Yes, of
about?
course. Thank you. Uh, the rural pace is changed very much in last years. In the past, it was a living space. It was sustained by the local communities. Now it's a space with small urbanized islands in an industrial agriculture field, and this is not sustainable because the ecological systems, including the water systems, are destroyed, and ecosystem services are not anymore available. So the rural communities, the learning communities, they have to learn again how to live in peace with the nature, and how to sustain this ecological system and the ecosystem services. And I think this respect, the rural learning communities, they are a kind of laboratories
Mm.
which experiment this new relation between the rural communities and nature. And in the future, they have a mission to rebuild this connection between the nature and the human communities.
Thank you. I think you are already highlighting some of the key points. One is the ecological approach to to living in communities in rural areas, but also the innovation part. I think Cath, who has published a book together with a colleague on learning communities and rural areas, also urban areas, because obviously we're talking about both to a certain extent. Cath, what is your approach?
Thank you, Gina. Yes, we've together with my colleagues Sylvie Rita Kusarova from Czechia and Linda Hargreaves, we've compiled a collection of research stories from across Europe. And what comes from that is, I guess, that I'd like to broaden the idea of learning in communities and learning as communities. As our great colleague Runa Kavalsen would say, children grow up in real places, not in an abstract society. So through the work that I've been doing, I can see that schools and other places of formal education, which I know perhaps lie outside of the focus of the study of adult education scholars, but I'd like to bring schools, colleges, and universities, sites of formal education, perhaps, into this space, and see these places as learning communities. Traditionally, in rural areas, schools have been seen as hearts of communities. It's a very traditional idea. Of course, many of us realise that that isn't the case. Um, but I think we can see that where communities are directly involved in making decisions in schools and other sites of formal education seems to me to be a really important factor. And I'd like to bring to the space the work of Ramon Fletcher and the idea of egalitarian dialogue. That seems to me to be really important in this idea of learning in and as community, dialogue and people working together, drawing on ideas of collaboration and cooperation. Thank you, Gina.
And it's the usual thing. Cath, that is very, very interesting, and highlights some more issues. The rural areas shouldn't only be about adult education, although of course that is our focus, but it is really a lifelong learning approach, and the connection between formal, non-formal, and the different institutions is very important. And the other approach about learners' voice and in and with communities is also something that hopefully we will later also discuss when we talk about the projects, initiatives, but hopefully our colleagues who are currently listening will also contribute to that. Thank you. Now, let's see if Eva is able, through her connection, to contribute. I found really interesting how Cath said, there's the school in the middle. We know from a number of countries that the foci school is very often in the center of a community, and you have created one. Can you tell us a bit more? What does learning communities in rural areas mean for you with your experience? Let's see. Oh, we do have connection problems. Oh, here she is again. Eva, does it work? Unmute, please. We need to unmute Eva. Okay, we seem to have problems.
Thank you very much. I hope I could be heard.
No, unfortunately not. Eva, you need to unmute, please. Yes, now.
Okay, now I'm heard, I hope. Okay.
No, can you please
I would
repeat?
like to say that I have been witnessing the changes in rural areas for the last 30 years. And I see that the learning potential in rural areas is growing. Is growing also because of, particularly after entering EU, and many projects which help to actually overcome to some extent the gap between cities and rural areas. I could witness that there are some positive changes. And for me, it means that people are becoming a bit more involved. They are more active. There is not so much apathy like it used to be before the entering EU. I think still a problem with the trust between people and critical thinking. It's still something which needs to be strengthened. And the example that you gave and that I'm particularly involved in is the folk high schools, which are actually in the beginning, they were always connected with rural areas, which could work as a little bit like a crystal. And around this crystal can more substance or more cooperation or more people could be gathered, because for starting point, they need the rural inhabitants, they need to have a platform to meet, to overcome the problems, the solitude, the different complexes they have, so they can meet, they can share, that could be respected, and then they could be taught. So in the process of learning, it's always to first to overcome the problems, like meeting and feeling secure and feeling respected, and then the learning starts. So I think folk high school, as we practice here in Poland, is very a promising tool, and I hope it
continues to have problems with her connection. Hopefully she'll be back soon, and we'll ask her a bit more about her initiatives. So maybe in the meantime, one of our other speakers can get started. We, of course, want to know a lot more about your projects and initiatives. And Zoltan, I think you have an excellent example about that. I think what I need to say, Zoltan is actually in Romania, and the project is in the area of Transylvania. And if you have never been there, go there. It's one of the loveliest and most interesting spots in Europe. So Zoltan, please tell us more about your project.
Yes, thank you, Gina. Yes, you are welcome to Romania. I will tell a little bit about our project, Learning Communities in Rural Europe, which was an international project, an Erasmus project. And it was an amazing experience to compare the different rural communities, the different learning communities from Europe. It was explored the community from England, from Embercombe, from Germany, Kleine Jaszedów, from Czechia, Stuniakov, from Austria, Garden of Generation, and of course from Transylvania, Romania, the rural community from the Niraj Valley. And I have to say it was a fantastic experience to see how different, but in the same time different are these conditions and these communities, but in the same time the idea, the basic idea behind of these communities is the same. The basic idea is to rebuild the connection between the nature and the communities, because the actual trends of development, which going to urbanize this rural space is not sustainable in the future. It was very interesting to see the involvement of the community from Germany, where in a very difficult, with a village in a very difficult situation, it was rebuild that trust, it was rebuild the community, it was rebuild the connection between the land, the community, and the individuals, and it was recreated the spirit of the community, because in all project we see the main problem is in rural area is that in the traditional rural communities a lot of knowledge were transferred by the generation, and this is a fantastic, very valuable knowledge, and now this chain is stopped, is disturbed, and now we have to find ways to rebuild this chain, and to see how can be transferred this knowledge through this generation. The experiences are very, very different, because some projects, like in Germany or in England, were initiated in very, let's say, industrialized areas, agriculture areas. Is not anymore. Is not a traditional rural community in Romania, in Transylvania, especially. There are still rural communities which can be used, let's say, as a model for reconstruction of the rural space in all over Europe, because without the reconstruction of the rural space, will be very difficult to rebuild this harmony between nature and communities.
Absolutely fascinating, and it sounds also like you have, I mean, obviously there are connections between the the conclusions that our speakers have had. Cath, I saw you nodding in between, so I assume that your experiences and your research sort of comes to similar conclusions. Can you tell us a bit more, and maybe also comment on the examples and conclusions that Zoltan has provided?
I admire that piece of work enormously. It's been a great joy to read about it, and with pure serendipity, I live in a very rural part of England, and very near to one of the projects that appears in the LCRE Erasmus project. And interestingly, I work on various education and teacher education programs, and we ensure that our students spend some time at Embakun, which is one of the projects. So, because I'm thinking about the preparation of educators who are going to be working in rural areas, if it's perhaps an unfamiliar space for them. And as Zoltan talks about the kind of the way in which these chains of knowledge have become broken, and we're thinking about, and this is something that educators across the world are thinking about, is the preparation of education leaders, teachers, facilitators for working in places that might be considered away from metro centres. And that's a wonderful connection I feel with this particular project, is that my own students go and spend time at centres like the ones that Zoltan has, which is great. I think about the research that we've done across Europe certainly echoes those the change, and as Eva mentioned too, the changing nature of agriculture, and its relationship, and humans' relationship with rural spaces. I've been thinking particularly about the changes in attitude that have happened through the COVID pandemic. In various places across Europe, there have been changes in attitudes towards rural places, as people have fled the cities, perhaps, during times of challenge, and also thinking about the nature in many places across Europe, um, with the big migrations that we've been watching, and the nature of those, and the way that they're changing ideas about rural places. And I think that as Eva was also sharing, that the changing nature of attitudes and understanding of rural places is clearly going to impact on the way that educators, groups of people are learning. And I think that that's Zoltan's work is really important there. But it moves through then into the work of educators who are facilitating or leading in communities, learning in and as community. Some really good examples, and some really good examples of the innovation that can happen in these kinds of spaces, perhaps informal education spaces, but away from urban centres. And I think that's really, really important here.
That is again a crucial point, and I wanted to talk with you about that, because sometimes when we talk about learning in rural areas, what is the focus is the disadvantages and the challenges. I mean, we all know what they are. It's difficult to get to places. The infrastructure might not be good. I mean, as we're seeing with Eva, unfortunately, I mean, she was back in the meantime, but she's gone again. So there's a lot of focus on that. But I think what we need to see is that there is a lot going on that maybe the urban areas can learn from, and where a lot is happening. So I wanted to ask you a bit more, and maybe Cath, you can continue, and then Zoltan can add something. What are the exemplary things that are happening in rural areas? What is it about the impact of learning?
Thank you, Gina. Yes, this is for all of us who've been working in rural areas, and the long history, isn't there, of the way in which rural areas have been defined as deficient in some way, negative in some way. So, in classically in the schools and education research that we've been involved in, there are lots of examples of the falling numbers of children, the closures of schools, the difficulties perhaps of teaching and learning in multi-age classrooms, longer travel distances, less opportunities for access to specialists and so on. But actually, what I see in the research that we've done across Europe and the drawing together of this big body of work now is that all of these things are actually seen as great benefits. So small groups of people learning together can be seen as hugely important. This human scale education, and a real lesson for large education units, perhaps more likely in urban situations. Multi-age classrooms offer opportunities for intergenerational dialogue, and for groups of learners to learn across age groups rather than being segregated. There's a big issue with the worries about opportunity for access to specialists, but actually that seems to be an opportunity to develop much more holistic pedagogies, where learners can be seen as learners foremost, and with perhaps a focus on dialogue and focus on working together rather than sort of access to specialist knowledge, which perhaps with access to the internet now, many of us can access specialist knowledge in ways that we perhaps don't need our learning communities in quite the same way. But I think there are, of course, continuing issues with things like regards to access, travel, access to transport. And I think it raises, the collections of ideas perhaps we can include in discussions. I'm thinking about the sustainability goals, but things with, I think perhaps when we're looking at learning and in rural communities, that we see the issues with those three parts of sustainability: social sustainability, environmental, and economic. And I think perhaps that's a useful framework for doing some investigations and for thinking about our work. Does that make sense? That's probably something that Zoltan might like to speak to too.
And unmute. Zoltan, what is your take on that? You already talked about intergenerational learning earlier and empowerment, but would you like to add something to that point? I think it's a key question about the positive sides of learning in rural areas.
Yes, I think it's very important question. In my opinion, the traditional relationship between the rural areas and the urban areas has to be rebuilt, because traditionally the rural area send the food, the urban areas were feed by all kind of food from the rural space. Now the rural space around the big cities produce mainly to the global market, and the food in the cities are also provided from the global market. And I think this is a long term is not a good trend. I think need education. It's a need for education in the rural areas. They have to learn about the values of the rural space. The importance of the rural space is not only the space to provide food and to have any kind of agriculture, but is also an important space. And also the important space for people from the urban area, also for recreation and also for the ecosystem services. And also in the rural area has to be learn again the importance, the connection to the urban area, to the urban people. The urban areas are different from the rural areas. We have to accept this. And if we speak about some principles, what's mean the rural area? I think it's important to understand that in a rural area, the people they have to produce the food from themselves. It's important to have a lifestyle close to the nature, and it's important to have a community life. And this is including community life, including the intergeneration connection, the intercultural connection, and including also the inputs from the urban area. So I think we need this approach to have some good principles, and then start to start with these educational programs based on these principles, which are inclusive in for the rural communities and also for the urban communities.
Absolutely. Eva is back. Hopefully we'll be able to understand her. Eva, you wanted to add something as well about rural urban dialogue in learning communities. We need you to unmute, and let's keep our fingers crossed that the internet connection stays stronger.
Yeah, I'm very sorry, but it happens in rural areas that the totally electricity is cut off. But I wanted to say that I experience that there is a lot of very positive impact of this growing dialogue between urban city and rural dwellers, because we are different. Yes, myself, I come from the city, but I have been living in a village for 30 years, so I understand both sides, and I see how nourishing is that contact. And it comes from people that, for example, are city dwellers who want to stay in the village, but also the city dwellers who create some cooperative and want to buy food from small food communities in the village, or this initiative called community supported agriculture. There are several initiatives which helps this dialogue, and it's very nourishing for both sides. Also, because the people in the village, they start to understand the value of good food, the value of food grown in an environmental friendly way. And they are sometimes surprised with the respect some of the city dwellers have for the work. And the people in the village, they do not recognize sometimes the beauty of the environment they are surrounded by. And then somebody from the city comes and he says, wow, it's like a paradise. So it brings respect to the environment, and it brings respect to the work, they heavy work, because many of them, they want to run away from the farm and have an easy life in the city. And then they see this tendency opposite direction, which is very, very positive. And this is something what I experience here and a lot. And maybe the last thing I wanted to mention is this development of initiatives like eco-villages. It's not necessarily has to be a classical eco-village, but something which helps to organize different smaller initiatives in the village. Like we have a small organic farm, a small food production, and the women's cooperative, an association, and ecological folk high school. And for us, it's a real learning opportunity when we have to learn how to cooperate, how to find ways that we function. And then for the sustainability of such initiative, it's very crucial that we do not depend only on funds, external funds, but we try to be a bit self-independent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva, and I'm glad that you had the opportunity to make a contribution. Unfortunately, we're somewhat running out of time, so we won't be able to discuss that further. But please have a look at the various resources provided by our speakers. They are absolutely fascinating, and as you can tell from the discussion we've had so far, there are very many points that are really important, from empowerment to ecological issues to building communities, intergenerational learning. There is also a lot about active citizenship, learning and communities coming together. There is a lot of talk about and focus on adult education, and also other educational institutions as being the center, or the space where people can meet. So enormously important points. And we already had some comments from colleagues on the EPALE website. We won't have time to go into that, but please go log into EPALE. If you don't have an account yet, please go ahead and register, because then you can comment. We just had a comment looking at the question of growth, and that focus on growth, which might probably undermines attempts at the local level to create more inclusion, more ecology. We have had another comment and about being also in the non-formal, informal learning activities that might actually be easier than in large cities. So we need an alternative and promotion support for the rural areas and not only urban. There was also another comment on, and Eva has talked about that as well, the funding situation. Can we have these initiatives without government funding? What do we need? I mean, that is, again, one of the key questions. How do these communities create sustainability? So very, very important points. I'm sorry that we need to wrap up now. I always have the feeling that we could now sit and continue another hour easily. But let me say thank you to our speakers. It's been absolutely inspirational. And I thank the team in the background. The technical situation was a bit of a challenge, and hopefully everyone could hear and so on. I have the impression that we did have the possibility to still go ahead. So please have a look at the EPALE website, log in and continue the discussion. I've already, as I said, seen a lot of good questions, comments, examples, and so on. So thank you, and let's continue, and hopefully you'll take inspiration from the great examples and inputs. Thank you, and bye-bye.